You are very welcome to this special webinar, Supporting Ourselves as we Move Forward. It doesn't really need a context, but just to explain why we're presenting an extra webinar apart from our monthly webinar series. We've noticed and aware that a lot of people are experiencing anxiety as we come out of the COVID pandemic. And while it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, that the majority of the people in Ireland are vaccinated, we're feeling a lot more relaxed in ourselves about it. We know COVID is still there. And some people are taken by surprise at the level of anxiety they're experiencing. So we've had a lot of requests for information and support in this area. And we're delighted to have the expertise and support of Mr. Brian Samson. He's Health Promotion Manager at ESB. And also our own Stephen McBride, who's Director of Services at Aware. So this is a conversation that the three of us are going to have on supporting ourselves as we move forward. And we've had some questions in advance, which I'll come back to later in the conversation. So Brian, first of all, if I can ask you to give a brief introduction to yourself and your role in ESB, it sounds great.
Thank you, Claire, and good morning. So Brian Samson is my name. I'm Head of Health Promotion with ESB. So my role really in ESB is to drive the whole area of health promotion. So we're looking to encourage our staff to kind of think and act positively around decisions they make around their well-being. So as part of my role, I would manage the relationship with some of our support services. So for example, we have a 24/7 counselling service that our staff can access. We have an in-house EAP team who also offer a confidential service to our staff on really any matter that may be impacting our staff. And then the health promotion team, we manage kind of the long-term programs that we put in place for ESB staff. For example, one we're kind of expanding out at the moment would be our mental health first aid program. We have a stress management program, and then we have a number of other issues that we kind of release monthly to our staff. So we have a monthly bulletin that kind of focuses on the main pillars of health and well-being, for example, nutrition, movement, stress management and sleep. And then we have an accompanying live webinar that would kind of be associated with the main topic of our month as well. So we also manage a large team of health and well-being champions, and they would be well-being advocates for ESB. So we're ESB, we have locations all over the country, in Ireland and the UK. So in most of those UK locations, we would have well-being advocates who work directly with the health and well-being team. So we manage that relationship. And we also manage a relationship with our mental health first aid team. So currently we've got 140 mental health first aiders in ESB, and we're hoping to train another 100 between now and the end of the year. So it's a very, very busy role, very broad. So it's managing support services, managing some partners, but also working with all the businesses to promote health and well-being with their staff.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to kick off with a question for you, but I'd like Stephen to say hello first, and then I'll come back to you, Brian, if that's okay. Sure. So Stephen, you're very welcome. And we just had a meeting not that long ago, but it's lovely to meet with you again. And thank you for joining this. What's your sense on this as a topic, Stephen? And then I'll come back to ask Brian in detail and then come back to you.
It's very interesting to collaborate on this, Claire and Brian, to have the conversation from, as you said in the introduction, about some of the comments that participants and service users of our programs and are talking about and experiencing themselves. So my sense of it is that it's important to have this conversation and to develop the awareness and understanding out there in the community at large around the importance of mental health, and also what we can do to promote resilience, and also in the sense of that too, to kind of support ourselves and for people in their own social networks to support each other. And I'm looking forward to the conversation in that regard.
Great, thanks, Brian. I was going to say, thanks, Stephen. So Brian, if I come back to you, and in terms of your work in the ESB and supporting employees around the area of their well-being, how is it for you at the moment? Are most people still working remotely? Have you a date when everybody's coming back, or have you changed how you work? How are you managing all of that?
Yeah, there has been a lot of change, Claire, as you can probably imagine, since March 2020. So just to answer your first question, we would have a mix of staff. So we'd have office-based staff. We'd also have staff, for example, like our network technicians, who have remained working as normal throughout the pandemic, while our office staff have had to shift from being office-based to being home-based. So with regard to health promotion, some of the things that we've been really working on, one would be a mental health first aid program. So we partnered up with Mental Health First Aid Ireland to basically train hopefully about 350 staff in mental health first aid. And we see that as a very, very important program as we have staff returning to the office. And so we will have that peer-to-peer mental health support available at each location for our staff. For anyone who might have any concerns around anxiety, stress, depression, we'll have trained up staff at each location there available to help our staff as they return to the office. I guess another big change in ESB has been this kind of smart working policy. So as we return to the office, there will be much more flexibility around how it is we can work as in our business units. So for example, we may have staff who may be very anxious to get back to the office and be in the office 5 days a week. That option will be there for them. We also may have staff who may need a little bit more time to make that readjustment. So they can maybe come to the office once a week for a couple of weeks, and then until they find that balance that works best for them, maybe being in the office 2-3 times a week or being at home 2 or 3 times a week, that flexibility is going to be there for them. So that's been a big change for ESB. Pre-pandemic, we were very much more or less 9 to 5 in the office Monday to Friday. So it's been a dramatic shift in the way we're going to work now once we return to the office. Some of the other things we've been doing for staff, so as well as the mental health first aid program, we rolled out a stress management program, because we can tell from some of the calls that are going through to our support services, whether it's the in-house one or a confidential counselling service, that stress and work-based stress has been an issue throughout the pandemic. So we released a stress management program, which is available to all staff. So it's up on our intranet. And that stress management program goes into detail about just what stress is, how it can manifest, how it can affect our health, and ways to mitigate against it as well. So we've released modules for employees, for managers, and we also have a module where one of our team members will go and work directly with a team if stress has been identified as an issue within a team. So she will go in there, look through the issues, and maybe come up with resolutions to how they can work around the stress. So that's been very, very successful for us. We're also in the middle of implementing a new online wellbeing resource, which will provide staff with content and many resources around those kind of main pillars of health and wellbeing. So nutrition, mental health, sleep, and movement. So it provides content, tips, and reminders of just why it's so important that we kind of engage in these activities on a daily basis, and the impact and the positive impact it can have on our health as well. And we continue to work on our monthly bulletin, where we get really meaningful content out on a particular topic for each month, and we accompany that with a live webinar. So we may have somebody from the health and wellbeing team present out on a topic such as nutrition, or we may invite in some specialists or guests to talk around that as well. And generally we have a Q&A session on that as well. So we've been doing an awful lot of work. We probably, from a health and wellbeing point of view, we've never been busier. The demands on our time to come and talk to business units around health and well-being, the importance of exercise, the importance of nutrition, and how all of these components come together to, I guess, positively impact our mental health. So if you're eating well, if you're exercising well, if you're sleeping well, the positive impact that has on our mental health. So getting that message out to our staff has been really, really important. As I say, it's never been busier for the health and well-being and health promotion team.
Ryan, can I ask you, that's a huge amount of work the organisation is putting in.
Yeah.
How many employees roughly do you have? Or maybe you know exactly.
In ESB, we have in around 7,000 employees. So we're spread all over. We're in every city and every town in Ireland, plus we have locations in the UK now as well.
Okay, so that's a lot of people. So
Yeah.
the initiatives that you're making and the advances, are they coming from a demand from your employees? Are you hearing from people who are at home saying to you, I'm dreading going back into the office? Or is this something that you're anticipating that people will experience?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. Again, we get really good data from our support services, so we can see what the issues are, what's arising month on month. And certainly anxiety tends to be, the biggest call category or case category that we would experience even pre-pandemic. But throughout the pandemic, it's kind of remained number one. But there's been a shift in terms of what's kind of driving that anxiety. At the beginning of the pandemic, it was very much the newness, the pandemic itself, the restrictions we were living in, and the uncertainty with the future. But there's been a shift now to what's driving that anxiety now. It's more with the return to the workplace. What's that going to mean? How is it going to look? Do I have to start commuting again in the morning and the evening? How is it going to be for childcare? What's it going to be like back in the office? So there's all this anxiety as we return to the workplace as to what is it going to be like. So it's been a shift from kind of uncertainty to now it's okay, we're reopening society and we're reopening the workplace, and how is that going to be? So there's a lot of anxiety around that.
Yeah, absolutely. My own passion in life is really helping people understand and manage anxiety. And I know that comes from a long history of anxiety myself that I didn't recognize as a child. And it's only as I've got older and I look back and I think, oh, that's what it was. So I might share some ideas that I found helpful. But thanks a million for the moment, Brian. And I'd like to come to you, Stephen, and just your response to what Brian has been saying, and also in terms of Aware and the services that Aware provides to support people, because 7,000 people are very blessed to work with ESB, so that leaves a lot of people who aren't, and they might not, they won't have access to the same services that Brian is talking about. So what would you suggest, Stephen, please?
Thanks, Claire. It was lovely to listen to you there, Brian, and just thinking about how that situation, as you're describing it, in respect to the ESB, replicates itself in society in general around the tentative steps about re-emerging and what stress that creates, and then sometimes perhaps the thinking that can go on internally about I should be able, and it's one of the most unhelpful two words that can be uttered to oneself. Is I should be able to manage this, and what is my anxiety about going into this shop? So I think really what's important to say is that for us all to take small and slow incremental steps and to try and normalize some of the thoughts and feelings that we're experiencing in relation to this reopening of society, trying to make it okay. And it's so important to try and validate some of those feelings and thoughts as they emerge. And then in relation to making it specific to some of what we offer at Aware are kind of the counterbalance, or trying to check some of the unhelpful thinking patterns that can go on, which sometimes emanate from the I should comment, or I ought to, or I have to. So a lot of our educational programs, coming from a cognitive and behavioral perspective, would seek to kind of challenge and kind of wonder about some of those unhelpful thinking patterns. Our Life Skills online program, or our Life Skills program that's been operating virtually, which, all going well now in the autumn time, will have a blended approach, will be offered virtually and face-to-face. So I suppose in answer to your question, Claire, a lot of the thoughts that come up for people about what's it going to be like even going into a coffee shop where you haven't been, you've ordered your coffee from the hatch, and what's it going to be like sitting indoors, and trying to be okay with the tentative nature if that's how you're feeling. And then for a certain cohort of people, perhaps you'll be ready to jump right back in, and that'll be fine for you, too. So it's really trying to, as I say, to try and validate how you're thinking and feeling about those situations in the social settings, so that you don't end up internally criticizing yourself or kind of giving yourself a hard time about the difficulties that we're all facing, kind of re-emerging back into society, and trying the mental energy it takes to navigate the world. And, oh, have I got my mask in my pocket? Where's my mask? I'm about to jump onto a bus. All of those small things that take up mental energy. And as I was saying there, there's a suite of educational programs, as well as the support services, our support line. If this anxiety or feelings of depression and low mood are manifesting itself to do with the re-emerging, I'd encourage people to use our services, to ring our support line, or to come along to one of our support and self-care groups.
Yes, and that's really important, Stephen. And it's also, all of Aware's services are free to people who would like to use them. Isn't that right?
That's correct, yeah. Free to any member of the public who's experiencing, any difficulties in relation to their mood or sense of anxiety and the feelings of depression. that they can contact, our support line, email our support mail, and attend one of our support groups,
Okay, and thank you for that, Stephen. And I'd like to pick up on what you were saying, because Brian was talking about anxiety and you brought in depression. And my understanding is that anxiety and depression can be very, very linked. And I remember, if I can just take a few moments to just give a few ideas myself as well, and a few little bit of input. I remember learning that it's very easy to get depression, that all we have to do really is stop having fun. And over the last year and a half, heading into 2 years, a lot of us have had a very restricted life, so we haven't been able to get out. But with anxiety, there can be a sense of retreating. So if we have an understanding of anxiety as a learned response to danger, and or what we think is danger. So in the past year and a half, we've actually discovered that we're way more resilient than we thought we would be. Well, certainly I'm a lot more resilient than I thought I might be. I remember the first time, having been cocooned for quite a while, going out, I had a particular work situation, and going out and feeling really anxious, and something as simple as putting petrol in my car was very, very frightening. I wore my mask at that stage. Masks weren't mandatory. I felt like an alien heading out. Whereas friends of mine who were working in the front line, who were out all the time, didn't experience that, and were looking at me like, what's your problem? Why are you worried? It's fine, it's safe. Whereas for me, I didn't have a sense of it being safe. So some people now at this point in time have maybe not gone out, and they might be experiencing for the first time a sense of, oh my gosh. And now suddenly they're feeling vulnerable, they're feeling anxious, they're feeling upset, and they're being expected and asked to go back out into the world. So I think, in terms of the pointers I'd like to make, the first is that we're really kind to ourselves with how we feel. And I was smiling, Stephen, you might have noticed when you said about, the thing is to get our inner critic to stop. Mine doesn't, it just keeps going. And what I've learned is to see it as just a nuisance, that somebody has an opinion and that's fine, but I don't have to listen to it. And I've learned to turn down that internal critic. So by acknowledging what anxiety is, it's a normal response. And anxiety can be linked to depression, and depression can be anger turned inwards. And my experience over the last little while is that a lot of people are actually experiencing anger, maybe in a way that they're not used to. Angry about having to go back to work or having to go into the office, and why will the company not allow them to stay at home? They work very, very well, and maybe frightened by their experiences of anger. And so with depression, a warning sign is if somebody's withdrawing. And with anxiety, a warning sign is if anyone is avoiding. And someone yesterday said to me that she was reading a book and it said, do it before you're ready. And I thought that made so much sense to me. Really, we need to do things before we feel like it, before we feel better, getting back out into the workplace, even if we feel anxious, or particularly if we feel anxious. So Brian, what are your thoughts just from what Stephen and I have been saying there? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, yes, it does. As I say, anxiety has always been, I guess the top call category, or, support case that we kind of would kind of counsel internally as well. And we have seen an increase over the last couple of months in calls and cases related to depression as well. So that has been, I guess, a little bit concerning for us. But we do feel we have, I guess, the right support services in place with our mental health first aid program, with our stress management program. We have a very experienced in-house EAP team who've been dealing with also, many different issues over a number of years. And, as well as having our own support services in-house, Aware would be one of the support services we would always direct our staff to as well, in terms of if they're dealing with anxiety or stress issues as well. But to your question earlier on, a lot of what we do is, feedback from senior management, from HR, from our support services, and that kind of drives what it is we will work on or what programs we will implement in ESB. And certainly anxiety and depression are two that we're a little bit concerned about. We're certainly seeing a lot more about at the moment, but we know why that is. So we just need to make sure that we have the support there for staff as they return to the workplace.
Yeah. Great.
I was just thinking about picking up on one of the things Brian said earlier, you know, and the importance, I think, of connecting into the seemingly kind of mundane is not the right word, but kind of the bread and butter stuff of exercise, nutrition, and sleep. And it's something that we can all pay attention to and create some meaning to what experience around those three kind of constructs, you know, what it means to try and exercise. And for some people, it's a run and exerting themselves that way. For some people, it's swimming, whatever it is, you know, even a walk, you know, to try and look after those kind of bread and butter aspects of our lives and the kind of meaningfulness that can get developed from that internally. And that, I think, sparks kind of, that protects our mental health, and that further promotes that word you used, Claire, earlier on around resilience. I think that's very important as we navigate the world as society is starting to reopen bit by bit.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And we've a few specific questions that people have asked us. And the first one here is somebody who's concerned about how do they cope with socializing again? And this is moving a little bit from the workplace, and obviously we'll be socializing in the workplace as well, but how do people cope with socializing after lockdown? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I suppose in answer to that, I think, you know, I've referred a little bit to it previously around the small incremental steps. And you were saying there, interestingly, do it before you're ready. And yet kind of to think about that, but not to put yourself too far out of your comfort zone. You know, so what are you comfortable with, and trying to take those small next steps onto that, but not just charging into something that would make you feel really uncomfortable, because that will spike your anxiety, so that the response that you make to it is graduated, and to use that word again, incremental, so that you feel as though you can develop that confidence internally about, actually, I did this, and then the next day I might be able for something more, but I might not. And again, it's then back to the idea of not criticizing yourself for maybe not making what your target or goal is, that tomorrow's another day, and that we can try again then.
Okay. You know, Stephen, I agree with you, and that was very much part of my training, but I've also had the experience with lots of people where going for something that really challenges them and knowing that they're going to experience a lot of anxiety doing it can be hugely beneficial, because suddenly things that are important and triggering anxiety, but less so, suddenly are very, very easy to do. So I often encourage people to do the opposite of actually what you've just said, to go for something that's really difficult, but having tools to help them with the anxiety. So first of all, knowing that it makes sense for them to feel anxious, just as like when we were going out to, our ancestors going out to hunt the bear, the sick feeling in our tummy, the clammy hands, the sweaty, the thoughts racing, all of those are normal. So for somebody going into, say a busy supermarket or a shopping center where they've been avoiding, and what I found is that if people do the graded and the graded and the graded, that could take 6 months, and they might each time be very hard on themselves and can dismiss and say, yes, I did that, but I'm never going to be able to do the big one. Whereas if they just take a deep breath and their health, they have the tools, breathing exercises, and manage their thoughts and are really supported in it, then they come out and think, wow, I did that. I didn't think I'd be able to do that. And then suddenly going to the post office, for instance, might not be. So it very much depends. So
yeah, sure.
Throw that into the mix as well.
And I think it'll play out in the workplace in relation to, you know, and I've had that experience myself about how do you know, because we have to navigate social and physical distance, don't we, as we've become so used to that term, social distancing, you know, because it's so important in life, I think, because we're social creatures, not to be distant, to connect with one another socially. So this idea of social distance in the workplace, and do I wear a mask now, and who's, you know, so obviously there's kind of policies and procedures in all kinds of workplaces, and I'm sure, Brian, you're on top of all of that and have worked through all of that with the senior management, etc. in the ESB, you know. So it's just trying to kind of think about what it's like to kind of understand that, so that we can kind of be collaborative with one another, and also kind of understand that people think differently, and, you know, people's understanding of different guidelines or regulations can, you know, be misinterpreted, and, you know, we're human, we're fallible, and we make mistakes.
Yes. And Brian, on that, I've had people that I've had the privilege of working with who have been out from work with anxiety or with depression or both, a combination. And the company is saying, don't come back until you feel better. And the GP is saying, stay off until you feel better. And the person is saying to me that they feel really fine when they're at home, but then when they need to go back to meet with the medical doctor in the company, suddenly they feel anxiety, suddenly their heart's racing, suddenly they're, by the time they actually drive in and go down the corridor and into the office, they're experiencing extreme anxiety. So the consensus from everybody is, you're not ready to go back to work. And then they go home and there's they're safe. But then they start to worry about, well, when am I going to be able to go and beat themselves up? And this is where I come in saying, look, Susan Jeffers, the late Susan Jeffers book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, but with compassion. So getting back in there. And I think from employers, it's really important as well to have a sense of understanding that, look, anxiety is normal. There's nothing wrong with anybody experiencing anxiety, but we need to acknowledge it. And then distraction can be very, very helpful, and helping people to manage it as opposed to not have it. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been at the forefront, I guess, in ESB's decision to move to this kind of smarter way of working. And we've really moved very, very quickly with this. As I say, we went from a very almost rigid Monday to Friday 9-to-5 company to this whole new way of working. And the situation that you just outlined there would have been part of that decision to kind of move very, very quickly with this as well. So in your example there, if we have a staff member who, very anxious about returning to work, maybe doesn't want to, feels fine at home, maybe, as you said, maybe angry about having to come back into the office, there is a way there, a very, very flexible option now for that staff member to, I guess, very lightly dip their toes in back to the office. It could be a half a day, one day a week, and allow them slowly build it up. So that flexibility and option are there. So I think a lot of companies are going to have to really, really engage with this type of new way or flexible way of working, because I think, again, you guys know all of this, but anxiety is going to be a big feature as people return to work. For some people who are maybe more outgoing and extroverted and really want to get back to the office, this is going to be great. They'll be back in the office 5 days a week. For a lot of people who are maybe more introverted, or who have maybe not as introverted, but have really enjoyed the experience of working at home, because they haven't had to commute. Childcare has been an awful lot easier, and it just really, really suits them. Or maybe they're living a long distance from work. This work from home model really, really suits them. So, there could be some anger, there'll definitely be some anxiety, but I think companies are really going to have to look at this and engage with staff and implement programs such as smart working, which ESB have gone ahead and implemented.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important for us as a society not to catastrophize everything, not to think, oh my gosh, we're all, everybody's going to experience massive anxiety. And I know neither of you are saying that, but there is a view out there that, we're very vulnerable, and that the increase in mental health difficulties increased, and young people are being seriously affected. And Dr. Tony Bates recently referred to a study in The Lancet, which was really interesting. And it looked at quite intensive review of research studies, which found that actually, surprisingly, and contrary to what people expected, the general mental health of people has been okay. So I think it's very important that we don't have a sense of expecting things to be really, really, really difficult. Yes, there will be, but we're able to manage it as well. So it's getting that balance. Stephen, if I can ask you, I can answer this question, but I'll ask you, how do we avoid worrying about coming into contact with people who refuse to get vaccinated?
Well, I suppose in my first response to that is that it's, I think the idea of avoiding worrying is not necessarily, I would kind of frame it or think about it a bit differently, is that we can't avoid worrying. And, sometimes that's a personality basis to ourselves. Like some people are get worried or more anxious or fretful about different situations than others. And it's, again, this kind of space of trying to accept oneself for who you are. And perhaps that takes some work and some kind of reflection to try and say, well, I am worried about this. And it's very normal and natural to be worried about becoming contaminated or contracting COVID-19 because of the impact that it might have on you and our loved ones. no one wants to have to self-isolate for 10 days or to experience sickness, however mild or severe it is, and hopefully it wouldn't be severe. So it's a very natural thing to worry about, the idea that if someone, am I going to be infected or contract COVID from this person who's maybe not complying or whatever. So it's really trying to be safe in yourself, and not to, if not demonize, but to kind of be hard on yourself for worrying, I think. Do you have anything to add to that, Claire? Or
No, I agree with you. I mean, first of all, I think it's impossible to stop worrying.
Yeah.
So I suggest that we allow ourselves to worry, but we contain it. So we worry for maybe 10 minutes every day, and that's it. And then the rest of the time, thought pops into our head and think, yeah, I'm worried about that, but I'll worry about it at my worry time. So we allow ourselves to worry, but we take control over it. But also the fear there, I would explore with someone, what's so bad about meeting someone, being in contact with someone who's not vaccinated? And then what's so bad about that? And what's so bad about that? And the fear at the bottom might be, well, I could get sick, or I might be hurt, or it could be an anger that they should. So helping people explore what is so bad about it, and then very much moving to, if that happened, if you were in contact, what would you do? How would you cope? Because we could well be in that situation, any of us. So we have a duty to protect ourselves, and really we've no control over what anyone else wants to do. So if people choose to get vaccinated or not, but we can continue to wash our hands, we can continue to protect social distance, we can continue to wear masks for a while if that's appropriate. So I think reminding us that we have within ourselves an ability to be able to manage the situation, I think can be really helpful.
I think I heard a line recently that kind of comes back to mind now. It makes a bit of sense. How can we tolerate ourselves in relation to this intolerant situation? So you might feel intolerant towards what's going on around you, and yet how can you tolerate your own response to it? And that's something we do have control over, our own response to it, and how we exercise our choice around that. And is there the power to exercise some choice to get out of the situation, to think and say, I'm not comfortable here, or I don't like what's going on here, and exit if possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And compassion, as we know, is a word that's hugely important, and self-compassion. And Brian, listening to how the ESB is responding to your employees, the 7,000 people or so that you work with, there's a very strong compassionate approach. And with depression, it can be anger turned inwards, but it can also be a sense of hopelessness about the self, the world, the future, and also sort of learned helplessness. So my sense is that for you and for other companies, part of the challenge now is to help empower people to get back into having a sense of excitement and a sense of achieving, rather than waiting. Like we're as a country, we're so dependent on NPHET and the government telling us what to do. So what's your thoughts on that, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, there's been a big shift in the way we've worked. And we're not in the, like say for our office-based staff, we're not in the office, but we're still working. The electricity hasn't gone down, the power is still there. So everybody's working as normal. We all have our jobs and our projects to deliver, regardless of what our role is, and people are still delivering. I think there's been a great sense of achievement. A great sense of pride that we were dispersed so quickly from our homes. A lot of us were disconnected in terms of IT or our understanding of IT. We had to learn new ways of working, new tools. The company had to roll out new technology very, very quickly, and try and do that to 7,000 people spread across Ireland and the UK was extremely challenging. So I think the company have done a great job in that, but I think all of us as individual employees, we've continued to deliver our projects, our budgets, are performing in our role. So that's given us a great deal of pride, and I guess a great deal of excitement as well, that we were able to make that shift so quickly and so suddenly and so dramatically. And then on the compassion side of things, I think again ESB have done a really good job on that. We in health and well-being have been provided with the funding to implement all these programs, all these support services. We're in constant, I guess, communication mode and promotion mode, because we're such a big company dispersed. We have to constantly communicate and promote out all of our services. This new way of working, this smart working, which again was implemented, I guess in a reaction to market conditions, but also in terms of looking ahead as to what the issues may be when staff return to work, and kind of giving them staff who needed kind of a softer way back into the office as well. So compassion is featured highly, I think, in terms of how ESB have reacted since the pandemic.
Yeah, I think it speaks, highly of your organisation, Brian. That whether people need, to use the support services that you offer, internally, that to have that pillar and those structures there speak so highly of the organisation, and also what people kind of internalize about that without even knowing it. The idea that these supports are there for me, and I think that creates a sense of security for people in the workplace, that there's your health and well-being centres and the provision of service in that regard is speaks so well, organisationally, and the sense of connectedness that forges for people on the team in the ESB.
Yeah.
Brian, I was thinking as you were talking, the ESB, for people who might be watching this who aren't Irish, the ESB is the Electricity Supply Board.
Correct.
Electrical Supply Board?
Yeah, the Electricity Supply Board, yeah.
Electricity Supply Board. So I was just thinking as you were speaking that the COVID-19 pandemic and the disaster and the crisis was new to so many people. But in your job, in your organization, you have been facing uncertainty probably every winter. And then when you hear the reports that there's going to be thunder, there's going to be storms, there's going to be hurricanes, there's going to be, and in each of them, you've risen to the occasion. So worst case scenario poles come down, and tragically, some people have been killed during the storms. And your employees have been massively at risk going out.
Absolutely.
And so do you think that experience of having worked with crisis before has helped you and your company to deal with the pandemic?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm probably a little bit guilty now of talking a lot about our office-based staff since the start of this podcast, but we have a huge cohort of staff who, as I say, have worked as normal since the pandemic started. And they're the people you just spoke about there. So when there's a storm and power goes down, these are the guys that are out there putting the poles back up, restoring the power, and they have continued to work as normal all the way through this. And as you said, putting themselves at great risk, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when there was so much uncertainty around the virus and how you can get it and how sick you may get. These people were still out there working, going into houses, going into commercial properties, working beside people, restoring electricity. So absolutely, but I think the history with the company, where it, year after year, it's dealing with a crisis in terms of storms, power being down, has really helped the company. We very, very quickly put our COVID response team in place, which has members from all over the company, led by my own senior manager, Liam Ring, who's head of the SHE function, which is the Safety, Health and Environment function. And they have done a fantastic job all the way through the pandemic. And obviously it's still up and running, but looking at the risks to the company, the risks to employees, and reacting very, very quickly as new news and new information broke around the virus as well. So I think they've done a fantastic job. But I would agree with you, Claire. I think the company's history in dealing with crises and storms and having to be out there and kind of face the public and work directly with the public has really helped the company respond positively around the pandemic.
Well, that gives me a huge sense of hope, Brian, that for the rest of us, or for other people who haven't had that opportunity before to respond to fears and isolation and staying at home, and that we can learn from this. And I'm just conscious of, I want each of you to have a takeaway, but my takeaway, if I can share it with you, is what I call an ABC coping sentence that I've developed. And there's 3 parts to this. So the first is A, acknowledge. So for anyone going back to work, into the office, acknowledging how you're feeling. I feel frustrated, I feel anxious, I feel upset, I feel scared, I feel angry. B, because I think this isn't fair, or because I think it's difficult, or because I think I might get sick, or because I think it's too soon, or whatever it is. And then C is choose. So what are you going to choose? So I choose to breathe slowly. There's a nice breathing exercise, tightening your non-dominant hand, breathing in, holding your breath 2, 3, breathing out and opening your hand, and linking that with the thought, I choose to breathe slowly. or I choose to take my power back, because like the ESB is all about power, and we've been a lot of times powerless because we haven't been in the position of making decisions. We've been told where we can go, when we can go, how many people can go. So I choose to take my power back. I choose to do it anyway. I choose to be kind to myself. And from what you just said, Brian, I choose to learn from this. I choose to build on this. I choose to make this time count. So if ever, and there's no saying that we won't be, so if ever in the future we're in a position of a pandemic, we'll know, we'll be quicker. Just like you were quick in responding, we'll be quicker. So that's my takeaway. But Stephen, what's your takeaway from this conversation? What would you like people who've been watching, listening to get from this conversation, please?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I was just listening to, and the word that resonated most, or I connected to listening to your takeaway, and that synopsis was around power and how to kind of exercise that, and I think that can spring internally. So how do we all individually kind of exercise our power if we're feeling disconnected or feeling powerless, that we're in a situation, with this re-emerging, and trying to support ourselves and our social networks, our families, our loved ones. So to be able to try and speak, because that's exercising our power. And I think that's one of the first bits of it, whether it's to do with the relationship with someone in the workplace, someone you're reporting into, your line manager, to be able to speak and generate a healthy conversation about some of the thoughts and feelings you have, as well as in our private lives, speaking and not letting the kind of thinking go around, the hamster on the wheel as it is, thinking internally, and trying to speak about what's coming up for us all, because within that conversation, some exercising your power to have that conversation, some meaning, and then comes from that, and then who knows what behavior can change, and hopefulness that springs from that, because that takes us away from being powerless.
Yes. Yeah, that's so important. Thank you. And just in that, before I come back to you, Brian, there's another question here about somebody who took a career break and feeling ill-equipped and going back into the role, particularly working in the area of anxiety, knowing all the theory and practice, but experiencing it. And I think this is really important for all of us. The more we know we don't know. And for someone who is working to support others, and Brian, this is your area, you're doing this. I think it's really important for us to have an understanding that we're human too, and really practice what we preach or practice what we teach, and using the tools ourselves. And then no embarrassment or shame. And Brené Brown is wonderful in talking about how important it is to be vulnerable and the dangers of perfectionism and setting ourselves up. So Brian, last takeaway point to you, and just in your own role in supporting others, would you resonate with that person, not maybe personally, but within your team or in general, that sometimes it can be hard to support others and managing, or not hard, but it's important to manage your own anxiety as well as helping others. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you've hit on a great point there. It is, and one of the things we've been doing in ESB, in health and wellbeing, and through our mental health first aid team as well, is really encouraging people to talk, as Stephen had mentioned there, about their feelings, how they're feeling. And we're starting to kind of get that message out there now as well, around the experience of returning to the workplace, or as we reopen society, will be different for many people. People are going to be experiencing a broad range of feelings and emotions, and it's very important that they are heard, that they are understood, and that we can empathize and work with our staff around that as well. But regarding in the role that I have, it's very much supporting people and helping people. But of course, I have my own anxieties as well. So try to take the time, and I really liked your concept there of worry time. That you will set a certain amount of time in the day to, okay, I'm going to worry about this now, and then I'm going to get on the day. So I really like that. So I think it's something that I might employ. Just get my own time to think about my own anxieties and worries, and then get back to the day job. But absolutely, I certainly resonate with that. But we are making a big effort in the company to encourage staff to talk about their feelings, encourage them to do so, making sure they're heard, and really ensuring as well that we have the proper support services in place to be able to kind of help and support them through whatever it is they're going through.
Mm.
Yeah, Yeah. And just the worry, excuse me, the worry time is a little bit more. And just because you mentioned it, I encourage people to write down their worries, get a worry box, like a biscuit tin or something, put the worries into the box. And then when they're worried, that obviously add to it. They don't have to bring the tin around. They can fill their pockets with worries and then empty it into the box when they get home. And then have a worry time, not bedtime, a worry space, not the downstairs toilet if someone's going to use it, but literally the car can be a good spot if it's obviously not moving, but somewhere where they can sit and worry in peace. And then for 10 minutes, and literally 10 minutes, take out the first worry about it. If you're worried about it enough, you don't need to worry about it anymore, throw it away, physically throw it away. If you're still worried, but you're bored worrying about it, put it back in, take a different one. And it's amazing when people do that and I suggest that people do it every day for 2 weeks. And then the rest of the time, the ABC coping sentence, I feel worried because I think whatever, but I choose to worry about it at my worry time. And then we're able to, and Stephen, your word, power, we have control over it. So look, this is a conversation that we could keep talking about forever. And I'm really aware of that for some people, they won't relate to this because they'll be so excited about going back to work. Sure. And then they might find a sense of anticlimax, and it might find a sense of disappointment and all of that. So that's another conversation for us to have at another point. But I would really like to thank you, Brian, first of all, on behalf of the ESB, but also on your own behalf for sharing ideas and the resources that you're using within the ESB. And Stephen, obviously, colleague, friend within Aware, and for talking not just what Aware does, but your own views as a psychotherapist and your own training. And I'm just privileged to be able to work with both of you. So for those watching, Guramila Mahagav Galer, thank you very much. And we look forward to working with you on future webinars.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Claire. Thanks, Stephen.